So in this interview, I speak once again with Dr. Timothy McCall. Timothy is a qualified medical doctor and a long-time medical editor for Yoga Journal magazine. He's probably most famous in the yoga world for having written Yoga as Medicine. And after spending the last 15 years educating people about the healing benefits of yoga and the health benefits of yoga, and even how it can be used to supplement traditional Western medicine and healing things like cancer. Timothy was himself diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer about 3 years ago and had to put everything that he'd learned into practice. And in his latest book, Saving My Neck, A Doctor's East-West Journey Through Cancer, he goes into a lot of detail, not just about the human experience of having been diagnosed with cancer, but also the role that his holistic approach to health had in his own recovery. And he spoke to me today about what that was like.
I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I was pretty freaked out initially and pretty worried. And, I really felt there was a good chance I was going to die. So, there was a period, I don't think it lasted that long, days to a week or so, maybe. I don't really remember exactly, where I definitely was like, and it was before I kind of learned more about, because I didn't, the thing was, one of the reasons I wrote the book was that these cancers that are related to the human papillomavirus, HPV related cancers, no one knew about them before a few years ago. And I stopped practicing medicine, more than 20 years ago now. I mean, still try to keep up to date, but I didn't know about these HPV-related oral cancers in men being like one of the fastest growing cancers out there. I had like no idea. And it turns out that these HPV-related throat cancers, while still potentially deadly, have a much better prognosis than throat cancers typically caused by some combination of smoking and alcohol, and often in people with poor nutritional status and lousy oral hygiene. Those are the people who typically got the old kind of esophageal cancers and throat cancers. So it turns out that there was actually more hope than I had initially, because initially I was like, oh man, metastatic cancer, that's like something that's, pretty devastating. Even if you've been doing yoga and trying to, not be so attached to being alive, that's a tough one. Even they say in the yoga teachings that even the masters have difficulty letting go of the fear of death. So, what it became was, I've talked to you in the other video we did about holistic healing and how it's this multifactorial thing. And I've had tremendous success with it and faith in it. And yet, as someone who practiced medicine for a number of years and who is scientifically minded, I also felt like I didn't want to discount conventional approaches to this cancer, that I wanted to take advantage of some of the conventional treatments. And I ended up, for a variety of reasons, choosing a kind of world-class cancer center in the Southeast United States, with a fabulous doctor who was a specialist in this area, who was coordinating my care. But it was an institution that was really old school. And they basically didn't know anything about integrative medicine or yoga therapy or nutrition or stress reduction. At one point during my treatment, I learned that one of the devastating side effects of the chemoradiation, particularly the radiation therapy that I had, was that it can lead to fibrosis of the throat, where the esophagus and the other structures get tight and restricted and painful, and it can limit eating. And the thing is, it often comes on not during the treatment, which most of the side effects do, but sometimes years later. And nobody told me about this side effect. And but I was doing my homework and reading, and I learned about it. And so I went into my doctor, and I said to him, what can I do to prevent fibrosis? And he is a great doctor and a wonderful human being too. He said to me, well, you know more about that than I do. Now, when I thought about it, I realized, well, that was true. I did know more about it than he did. And I had a bunch of ideas, some of which I'd already been doing. But I just felt it was so sad that here's a guy who's treating people every single day of his professional life, who are at risk for this devastating side effect of which there is no treatment in conventional medicine. People just suffer for this for the rest of their days. That's the fate, at least according to Western medicine. And yet there are all kinds of things that I did, ranging from yoga to body work, and just and again, part of the whole holistic thing. I looked at diet, I looked at stress, I looked at yoga, I looked at Ayurvedic balance, I did Chinese medicine, I did a whole bunch of different stuff. And I just felt like, but because all of these things, many of which are quite effective, have been assumed by conventional medicine to not be effective, and quackery and other stuff, mostly because these things don't have an industry behind them that can support research, and don't lend themselves to the kind of reductionist scientific analysis. Again, they're always wanting to impose a one-size-fits-all. Okay, you've got throat cancer, and we're going to help you with yoga. These are the 12 poses that everyone with throat cancer should do. That's how Western medicine, even the enlightened people in Western medicine, view what yoga might bring to this condition. And of course, I knew that that was just insane. And so as it turned out, I needed to change my health insurance because in America, it's done state by state. I had Obamacare, and it was done state by state. And it was toward the end of the year, and the only way I was going to be able to get insurance in the state that I was going to be living in when I got the treatments was to sign up for a new plan at the beginning of the year. So I got diagnosed in late November, and suddenly it was like there was a month where I wasn't going to be doing anything because I didn't have health insurance yet. So I went to India, and I said, what the heck? I'm going to do Ayurvedic treatments, massages and herbs and things, not to try to cure the cancer, but to just try to get myself in the most balanced, healthy place to endure the heavy-duty treatments they were about to give me. And while I was there, I read everything. I read a book on integrative oncology, cover to cover. I read crazy fringe anti-cancer stuff. And sometimes in those crazy fringe books, along with conspiracy theories and nutty treatments that I don't think have any chance of really working, there are often a few gems and a few things that I got that actually helped me. And I read the, basically autobiography or memoir of, Vincent DeVita, who was the founder, I think, or the first director of the National Cancer Institute in America. Basically the guy who invented chemotherapy, pretty much, okay? And he's like gung-ho, hardcore, give them more chemo, and then give them more after that kind of. I read that too, because I really wanted just the whole broad picture of experience. And so then I very carefully formulated a plan for myself. You know, which herbs I would take, you know, what kind of food I would eat, what, you know, etc. Just I mapped out this whole thing, had all this stuff I'd prepared. And then I got there, and when my treatment started, I started to get side effects within the first few days. And basically, you know, I was going to be drinking juice. Well, juice burned my mouth. That plan was out the window. So you know, vegetable juice. So I needed to come up with other plans. And the fact was that I was constantly needing to adjust what I was doing in response to what was happening and in response to new information I was learning, because I was doing ongoing research, particularly during the early weeks of my treatment. So for example, I learned just days before I was to start chemotherapy of all this research in animals that found that when they induced cancer in rats and mice and other animals, that when they fast them, when they give the chemotherapy, they have like way less side effects and much more effectiveness in treating the cancer. And, you know, nobody in conventional medicine knows about this. And by the way, I was living with my brother, who is also a physician and a little more straight-laced physician than I am at the time. And he thought I was insane. And he told me, he referred to my fasting. And by the way, I fasted during chemotherapy on the worst drug for causing nausea and vomiting of all the chemotherapies, the very worst one. That was what I was taking. And I had no nausea and vomiting during 6 courses of this chemotherapy. Okay. And it was, I'm convinced it was the fasting that did it. And I think also may have been part of why I seem to have had a very good response to the treatment as well. So the point is, I ended up writing the book because I felt like I had to write it, because I felt that this idea of how someone is holistically minded, who's in an environment that's not that friendly to holism, would go about figuring out at each stage of the process what to do. Not with the idea that this is a how-to guide, like you should do exactly what I did, because your unique situation is going to be different than mine was. But how I used holistic thinking to kind of skillfully choose the alternative and complementary things that I would do to try to lessen the side effects and potentially boost the effectiveness of the treatments, and just help myself to feel better and do better through the course of it. And I just thought, you know what? I think people might really be interested in learning just like how I went about doing it. Again, I'm not sure everyone took the lesson that way, because they want to, you know, I found one particular turmeric cream to be very effective for the radiation dermatitis, and everyone just wants to use that cream, you know, so that's fine, and I don't mind that. But my bigger purpose was, in fact, to try to teach people how to think about these things and make better decisions. And basically, if I had to sum it up, I was willing to do many things for which there is not good scientific evidence, as long as if there was a reasonable possibility they were going to help. Like they seem to have mechanisms of action, for example, that would make some sense scientifically, even if they had never been studied, as long as they were safe and they weren't going to interfere with my treatment. So, you know, I chanted mantra. Is there any evidence that chanting mantra helps cancer? Not that I'm aware of, but what's the harm? no one's ever been harmed, as far as I know, by mantra. so I could do that and feel like that could play a role, and it might not even be a role that could ever be diagnosed because in a medical study, because, or documented in a medical study, because nobody who's a yogi does mantra isolated from a whole bunch of other tools in yoga. It's a combination thing. And it might be that this thing that if you measured it all by itself would not be shown to have an effect, in the context of the broader picture might well contribute to the overall effectiveness. And again, the way these things are studied, we would never learn that. So I think, if you only do whatever's been shown scientifically to work, you're ruling out a whole bunch of stuff that very likely does work or could work. And you know what? If I did 12 things and only 4 of them worked, I'm glad I did all 12, because I don't know which 4 were the ones that worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, this is the problem with multiple interventions at the same time. Sometimes you don't know.
Yeah. It's really interesting how cognizant you were of that kind of unfolding nature of it, and how you had to keep changing things as a theme in the book, because that was one of the things that struck me most. And it's probably an insensitive analogy, but it was almost like a game where you had to be completely present to the effects of one thing, to know and almost be bartering with your doctor about whether to use the next thing or whether there was something else, and also trying to.
Or in my, okay, go ahead.
Sorry,
I was going to say, or in my case, sometimes deciding not to tell them at all because I didn't think they would. So, for example, I had a very unusual thing in my cancer that made it potentially more dangerous, which is that instead of the metastasis in my neck coming on the same side as the cancer was on one side, the metastases were on the other side. And my doctors were mystified by this. They'd rarely ever seen that, and they had no idea why that was true. Now, I had a very serious accident as a kid where I fell out of a second-story window and broke my spine in a bunch of places. And I have felt in my yoga practice that the prana doesn't flow as well through the right side of my chest, neck, and extending up into the head. And we know that metastases tend to go in areas where the myofascia is somehow restricted. And so I felt like I had a pretty good idea why it landed there. But I just thought, you know what? If I told them, they would probably just shrug their shoulders and maybe roll their eyes back. And I'm just not even going to bother to go there. Like, what's the point? So, I mean, I had the advantage of being a physician. I knew what was going to be safe and what wasn't going to be safe. And so I was able to do some things that other people would be well advised to have someone with proper training who could help guide them. And of course, there are all kinds of integrative physicians these days who can do that kind of thing, and other people, other healthcare people in both conventional and integrative medicine who have the expertise to be able to skillfully guide people.
There are parts of the book that read almost like a diary, and especially where the parts where you're in India, and you can tell from reading it how kind of present you were to the situation. You know, it reads like almost you don't sound like a doctor. It's like a creative writer's approach to writing. Right. And I wondered, was there a therapeutic aspect to writing this book?
I'm sure there was. And it was, part of my process of unfolding. I'll tell you one kind of really interesting side effect of being in India, because I not only was in India before the treatment, but then just as I was approaching a year after finishing cancer treatment, I went back to India to try to really just for a longer treatment. I spent actually 3 months there. That was right before I came to England to teach. And I had been there multiple times before, and Krishna Dasan, who's a character in the book, who is my Ayurvedic therapist, who I've known for years. But the fact was, because I was writing the book and because I was very much in this kind of literary journalist kind of state of mind, I started asking him more questions about his childhood and his experiences with the Ayurvedic doctor he trained with, and about his family and where he came from. And as a consequence, I understood him and India, and I greatly deepened my friendship to someone who I already loved in the process of writing the book. So I think it had a lot of side benefits. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are parts of it that almost read like a memoir as well. And I wonder, was that a result of, and I don't want to ruin the ending of the book and the kind of journey that you go on, but was that soul searching a result of kind of facing your mortality to a degree that ended up in the book?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that part of my spiritual journey for many, many years is to try to do psychological self-examination and to look at my shadow side, look at how certain things that happened in my life influenced me and maybe resulted in behaviors or attitudes which were ones that I really didn't want to have. And so, you know, that was my baseline coming into the project. And, you know, I try to be really honest with myself, and I wanted to be honest with the readers in the book. And so I felt like, to tell this story, I needed to talk about some stuff that's kind of uncomfortable and not always casting the greatest light on me. And I just felt like that was actually part of it. I do feel, whether it was the facing my mortality piece or not, that the experience of going through the cancer treatment and the recovery has deepened my yoga practice, has deepened my teaching, has deepened my yoga therapy. My workshops had always been reasonably popular, but I started noticing kind of a qualitative difference in how students were responding to my teaching. I just started noticing it around that time, starting actually when I came to London to teach, right, you know, flew directly from India into London. And so I definitely feel like it's been part of a process of deepening, and I feel like that process has continued. Still on the journey, but and I have to say, you know, yeah, I mean, essentially I'd say it's kind of a combination of a memoir and a meditation on holistic healing. And I had never written anything like a memoir before. I mean, there might be little personal things I would write here or there to illustrate some point or something, but I had never really done that. And it was a format, a genre that I really had to learn how to do. I had to, you know, with every book I've written, I've learned how to write it by writing it. And this one was very much an example of that.
How do you think how different do you think your condition and your life would be now had you not taken as much responsibility for your health in this recovery and just done what the doctors had recommended? Do you think you would be as healthy now?
Almost certainly not. And one thing is that my doctors themselves have told me that I've done way better than most of their patients. Like, I actually had a conversation with the main doctor, who was my doctor, just a few months ago. We stay in contact. And yeah, he was amazed. He was like, no, you're way ahead of other patients. You know, honestly, I mean, again, look at this issue. So one of the things I came up with in my research is the way that cancer cells really depend on sugar as their main fuel. At the cancer center, here I am fasting, not taking anything, and particularly trying to avoid sugars. And they're going around with lemonade and fruit punch and all this sugar sweetened stuff. And the cafeteria, or the little, you know, it's like a gift shop, but they sell food at the hospital. Everything they sell is crap. And even like the protein drinks, the same thing they put in your tube if they, you know, if you're getting a tube feeding, but they sell them in little cartons. And, you know, and I look at the ingredients and they're like high fructose corn syrup, sugar, 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 and crappy source of protein, like, you know, and, you know, chocolate flavor, you know, and I'm thinking like, wow, are they trying to feed me, or are they trying to feed the cancer? You know, so I personally think, and, you know, not even discussing the possibility of fasting with people when the evidence from the animal studies is overwhelming, and where I even found a case series, a type of study in well, actually it was just a report of cases. It wasn't really a study, but in an oncology journal, a cancer journal, of 45 patients who had fasted at various stages during their cancer treatment. And one of the things that, because I was really freaked about the possibility of just incapacitating nausea and vomiting. And my doctors were also freaked out about that possibility. And in that study I found in the oncology journal, the patients who fasted during chemotherapy had almost no nausea and vomiting. It was like almost entirely absent. So I'm like, and yet that was the thing that they had lectured me about, and they were so worried about, you know, this thing called anticipatory nausea and vomiting, where people have such a bad experience with their first time they get the chemo, that the next time they're getting the chemo, they start throwing up in the car on the way to the clinic before they've even got the chemo, because it's like become a conditioned response, and this is debilitating. And, you know, I didn't have any of that. And by the way, I didn't take, they had me like three and then one more if I needed it, different drugs to fight nausea. I ended up not taking any of them.
Wow. Wow.
And I had no nausea and vomiting, and I wasn't taking any of them. I mean, at the time, I took the first, as the chemotherapy was infusing, they gave me 1 dose of anti-nausea drug and 1 dose of a small, just one or two times, a little bit of steroid, which also has a anti-nausea effect. And I got them to remove the steroid after the second dose, the second time I had chemotherapy. And the one anti-nausea drug, I wasn't having any side effects from it. I don't think it was helping me, because I was supposed to continue taking for 3 days, and I didn't. I just took the 1 dose they gave me with the thing. But, you know, one of the things that I was aware of was that I was going to kind of be fighting my doctors in a good cooperative way, but definitely having a strong opinion and not agreeing to everything they wanted me to do, but instead negotiating everything. And I just felt like, choose your battles. Like, I could fight to get that drug removed too. It's probably not helping anything, but I seem to be tolerating it fine. And I'm already kind of working on 6 other ways. And I'm like, better to not be just like seen as this impossible patient. So, you know, the thing is, even though on some level I'm, you know, doctor's nightmare, pain in the ass patient who doesn't agree to anything they say or is fighting them and everything, I try to do it with good humor and never with anger. And I happen to have landed on this amazing physician who, even though he didn't know about what I was doing, could tell I did, and could tell, and could tell that he was someone that I was someone that he could work with, and that we could find a middle path together, which is exactly what we did on how much radiation I took, for example. He was a radiation oncologist. And, you know, I ended up taking more than I thought I would take and less than he thought I would take. And seemed to have gotten a good result from it.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the quotes that I highlighted in your book, actually. It's very relevant to that. So I'm perfectly willing to disappoint or even piss off my doctors if that's what it takes to make sure I get only the care I need and not an ounce more. And I did think he is the doctor's nightmare, and that's what you've just said. So that's quite funny. So my last question, because we're running out of time, but and I know so much of your advice is to be patient-centric, to take responsibility for your own health, and to kind of see what's working and notice what's unfolding and react to that. But is there any kind of general general advice that you have to anyone who's just had a diagnosis
Of cancer?
Yeah.
Well, you know, people are in different positions. And so you have to, you know, figure out how much time and energy and how much ability you have to sort through things. You know, as I said, I read everything. That's not necessarily going to be a good idea for everybody, because some people that's going to end up freaking them out more. So, you know, I think part of it is figuring out how much you are able to take on, how much makes sense for you to take on. And then, you know, if you are committed to having a kind of more integrated approach, then try to find and line up as best you can the resources that you'll need to be able to do this skillfully. And whether that's to, you know, get a nurse practitioner or a physician, or really, you know, there are some people in the world of holistic medicine who also know conventional medicine and medical science. So, you know, finding individuals who can a little bit walk in both worlds can be very, very useful. But I think it's a kind of a unique journey that each one wants us to take. But, you know, I guess if I'm going to give one piece of advice is, sometimes people in their gut know they don't want to do something, or they do want to do something, and they get talked out of it by an expert. Like my brother tried to talk me out of fasting. Okay, now that was bad advice he was giving me from the very best of intentions. He loves me, he supports me. He thought I was being crazy. He thought I was starving myself. He thought I was undermining my chance of recovering. So his intentions were all good. I don't fault him at all. But I had to have, you know,
conviction.
Yeah, that's one way of saying it. I was thinking of another one, which I wasn't going to say, but I had to have, you know, the ability, the willingness to undergo discomfort and to stick up for what I believed, you know. And so it's also a really good idea in cancer in general, if you can afford it, if it's an option where you are, to get second and even third opinions. I had a bunch of different opinions. None of them agreed with each other in entirety. And what I see happening a lot in medicine, again, can be very well-meaning physicians, but they have certain values. Like, we're only going to do things that are supported by science. And even if something is safe and you like it and it makes you feel better, if it's not supported by science, you shouldn't do it, because it might interfere with the chemotherapy or the whatever, you know. So, you know, I guess this just idea of making sure that the decisions in medical care that are value judgments. And so many of the decisions made in medical care are value judgments, not strictly based on science. And if that's the case, don't allow the physician to impose their values on you. Make sure those decisions reflect who you are and what's most important to you. Because you know what? Some people are not willing to endure another course of chemotherapy if it might add a month to their life. The physician may think, well, that's the reasonable thing to do. But some people are going to say, you know what? I've had a good life. That was torture the last time I did it. This has even less chance of working. I think I'm not going to do it. I'm going to live out how many days I have as best I can, and I'm just going to say no. But there'll potentially be a lot of psychological pressure put on people by family members, by physicians and other healthcare people, whatever. And you have to learn to stick to your guns. And if you know this is what's right for you, or this is something that's not right for you, have the courage to follow your convictions, even though it may be uncomfortable. I didn't, by the way, just have to fight my brother on fasting in one conversation. I had to fight him for weeks on end on this, while I'm going through it, while I'm wiped out. I've just got that little thing, and then just like, I mean, it's fine. It was, but I'm strong, and basically, as you probably got the indication for reading the book, I'm kind of not going to let anybody tell me what to do. I'm gonna figure it out. So I don't have trouble with that, but a lot of people do. And if you do, be prepared for it, because if you want to incorporate holistic stuff and your family's opposed to you, they may give you a hard time the entire treatment. And so you just have to decide what's worth it to you, and maybe it's not worth putting up with that, and so maybe you say, okay, I won't do it. So, but the point is, figure it out, go into your heart, be guided by your intuition, particularly if you've done stuff like yoga and other things that have kind of woken up your intuition. Then, yoga believes that if you really go into yourself deeply, that more and more your intuition tells you what's true, tells you what you need to do.
Timothy, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing what is such a personal story. It's been a real pleasure.
Tom, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you too.
If you enjoyed that, Timothy's done 2 other videos with me, which I'll leave links for around here. In one of them, he's teaching me an advanced version of alternate nostril breathing. So I really recommend that you have a go at that along with me. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what you thought in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this, then hit that subscribe button, because I've got some really cool interviews lined up.